Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe. And don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. But anyway, this week we are going to be talking about the solved case of Annalisa Raymundo. She was a very intelligent young woman who had such a bright future ahead of her, especially when it came to her career. But in 2002, all of that would be taken away when a 911 operator received a phone call from an unknown woman who claimed that she had just witnessed her neighbour being attacked, possibly even murdered. However, when the police looked into this phone call, all was not as it first seemed, and eventually over time the truth started to come to light. Please do excuse my voice, I'm a little bit ill at the moment, as you can probably tell. But just quickly before we get into the case, I would like to say a massive thank you to Aura Frames for kindly sponsoring this section of the video. Now, if you are currently searching for a present for a loved one this Christmas and you feel like you just haven't found the perfect gift yet, allow me to introduce you to Aura. Aura is a company that sells digital picture frames which you can use to showcase all of your favorite photos and even videos from your phone. I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to this, but I have hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of photos stored on my phone. Photos that have captured some of my best ever memories, and I haven't bothered to print them off and frame each one just because there are so many. But it always made me sad because they are photos that I want on show and I want on display. But Aura Frames has now fixed that dilemma. It is the perfect and easy solution to instantly frame photos from your phone. The Aura digital picture frames are so simple to set up. It takes literally a couple of minutes, if that. All you have to do is plug it in, connect the frame to your Wi-Fi, download the free Aura app on your phone, and then select the photos or videos from your camera roll that you want to be shown. You can add more than 10,000 images, and you can even share the frame with family members. You can literally invite them to share their pictures to the same frame. All they have to do is download the Aura app to their device too, and the app itself is compatible with iOS and Android devices. The screen on Aura's digital frames are high resolution, so your pictures will always look crystal clear, and on top of the frame there is an interactive touch bar, so you can view details about the photos and you can swipe and change photos like I'm doing right now. Aura Frames has been recommended by more than 130 gift guides, and they've been selected as one of Oprah's favourite things 3 years running, which is really cool. I just think one of these frames would be the loveliest present to give someone this Christmas. I know that I would be so excited to receive one. Each frame comes in a really beautiful gift box, and if you do plan on buying one for someone else, you can even put some pictures on there before you give it to them, so that when they receive it and they turn the frame on, they'll immediately see some photos of lovely memories that you have shared together. So if you would like to buy an Aura digital frame for a loved one this festive season, or even if you want to just treat yourself to one as a little Christmas present to yourself, then you need to be quick, because last year Aura Frames completely sold out at Christmas time. So visit auraframes.com and pick up your frame today. And Aura Frames are very kindly offering my subscribers a discount code, so if you use the code mollie30 you can receive up to $30 off while supplies last. Once again, visit auraframes.com and use the discount code mollie30 to receive up to $30 off while supplies last. Again, a massive thank you to Aura Frames for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. Thank you so much to you guys for supporting the sponsors on this channel, and now let's just get into the case. Let's jump back to past me, where I'm sounding a lot less ill and a lot more normal. So our case today starts off in the neighbourhood of Shippan, which is in the city of Stamford in Connecticut in the US. This is Annalisa Raymundo. She was a 32-year-old woman who was born on the 11th of September 1970. Anna was one of 3 children. She had a brother and a sister, and their names were Bernadette and RJ, and their parents were called Renato and Susan Raymundo. The Raymundo family were actually originally from the Philippines. However, at some point they immigrated over to the US. They decided that that was where they wanted to live and raise their family, and I believe they moved to the state of Michigan. Renato and Susan Raymundo were very kind and caring people, and they always wanted to help others as much as they could. They did a lot for their local community. However, they would also travel all over the world to places that were very poverty stricken, very poor areas, and they would help with like medical care and stuff like that because Renato was actually a doctor. So they were really great role models for their children, and they always wanted the best for their children. They wanted them to go far and do really well in life, and that obviously included Annalisa. When Annalisa finished high school, she actually went to Harvard University for her studies, and then following this she attended Columbia University where she earned a master's degree. Annalisa was a very smart young woman. She honestly could have had a job in any field because of her intelligence, but her absolute passion was in science, and so when it came to picking her career, she decided to go into pharmaceutical research. She was going to be a pharmaceutical scientist, and she soon got a job in this area. She got a job at a company called Purdue Pharma, which was in Stamford in Connecticut, and so Annalisa moved there. In her late 20s, she was able to buy her own place in the Shippan neighborhood of Stamford, and she really liked it there, and she really liked her job at Purdue Pharma. She was doing what she loved every day, and she was very dedicated to her career. And it was whilst Annalisa was working at Purdue Pharma that she started dating one of her co-workers. His name was Nelson Sessler, and he was kind of known as the stud, I guess, of the workplace. He was tall, he was good looking, and many of the women that worked there had a little bit of a crush on him. And he and Annalisa got along really well. They quickly developed a friendship when they first met, and then this friendship eventually developed into a relationship. They decided to take their relationship quite slow in the beginning because obviously they did work together, so they didn't want to just jump straight into something that perhaps wouldn't work out, because then they still have to see each other every day for work and it could be quite awkward and uncomfortable for them. So they took it slow to start off with, but as time went on, things started to get more serious between them and they became official. They were boyfriend and girlfriend, and they seemed to have a really good relationship. Nelson would stay over at Annalisa's condo, they would go out for meals together. They actually attended Annalisa's sister's wedding together, and they seemed happy. Annalisa loved Nelson and she thought that this was it for her. He was the one. She saw herself marrying this man at some point. Annalisa Raymundo was a woman that was looking forward to the future. She was looking forward to her future with Nelson and also the future of her career. But unfortunately, it would be a future that Annalisa would never get to see. Just after midday on the 2nd of November 2002, a 911 operator received a phone call from a woman. This woman sounded very panicked and frightened on the phone call, and she told the operator that she believed a man had just gone into her neighbour's house and attacked her neighbour. She said that she witnessed a man walk into her neighbour's apartment, and following this, she heard her neighbour yelling and screaming, and so she picked up the phone and decided to call the police in case her neighbour needed help. Now, this woman on the phone call wasn't able to tell the operator the name of her neighbour. She knew it was a woman, but she didn't know her name, but she could give them the number of her apartment, the address, and then not long after she passed over this information, the call just disconnects. It just cuts off abruptly. But anyway, as soon as 911 received this information, police officers were sent to the scene immediately. They were sent to the address that the caller had given, and as soon as they got there, it seemed as though this caller was telling the truth, because when they went into the home, they found a woman inside and she was dead. The woman was discovered lying on the floor right by the front door of the apartment, and it was clear to the police as soon as they arrived that this woman had been the victim of a brutal attack, because there was just blood everywhere, all over her body, all over the floor, on the walls. There was a lot of blood at the scene, and this blood, they quickly determined, was from deep stab wounds that this woman had sustained. They could physically see on her body where she had been stabbed, and it was mainly in the upper part of her body, so like her chest area and her neck, I think her face as well. But stab wounds weren't the only injuries that she sustained. It was also found that she had suffered blunt force trauma to her head. She had been hit in the head with some kind of heavy object, and I believe that this object was eventually determined to have been a weight or a dumbbell that was discovered at the scene. And the scene itself was just a complete mess. As I said, there was blood everywhere, but also the apartment itself was just a mess. There were items all over the floor. It didn't necessarily look like the place had been ransacked. It was more like there had been a violent struggle. This poor woman had put up such a fight against her attacker. She was really trying to fight for her life, and during this fight, things in the home had obviously been smashed and knocked over and stuff like that. And this victim was soon identified as being 32-year-old Annalisa Raymundo. She had been attacked and murdered in her own home while she was actually working from home. She wasn't working in the office that day at Purdue Pharma, she was working from home. Immediately after Annalisa's body was found, the police launched a murder investigation to try and catch whoever had done this to Annalisa, and also figure out why. What was the motive behind this vicious attack? And one of the first things that the police wanted to do was obviously track down the woman that made the 911 call, because she seemed to be their only witness. Well, not witness to the actual murder, because it didn't seem as though, from what she said on the phone call, that she witnessed the attack, but she did see the attacker's face. If you remember, she said that she saw a man go into her neighbour's apartment, and then after this she heard yelling and screaming. So she didn't see the murder happening because it happened inside the apartment, but she saw the murderer's face. So the police really needed to speak to this woman and get a description of what the killer looked like, because then hopefully they would find him quicker. However, the only problem was they couldn't find this woman that made the call. They couldn't find this neighbour. The police spoke to all of the people that lived next to or nearby Annalisa's apartment, and they all said that they weren't the one who made that 911 call. And interestingly, when the police actually traced the call, they found that it had been made from a payphone outside of a restaurant about half a mile away from the crime scene, Annalisa's house, which just seemed very odd to the police, because during the call the woman had given the impression that she was calling from her house as a neighbour, like she had just seen the guy go into Annalisa's house, maybe from her window or something. She heard the screams, and so she quickly grabbed her phone and called 911. So the fact that the call was actually traced to a payphone half a mile away didn't make any sense, and it really raised alarm bells for the police. The police also realised that the caller never told the operator her name during the call, and when the operator asked the woman to describe what the man looked like, the man who went into Annalisa's house, that's when the call disconnected. As soon as that question was asked, the line went dead where the caller had hung up the phone. She clearly did not want to tell the operator what the attacker looked like. But why? Did they actually know the perpetrator personally and was too scared to give their name over? Did they perhaps have some kind of misguided loyalty to this person, this killer? The police just couldn't work out the reason why this woman had made the call from a payphone, but they knew that they needed to find her quickly because she may have been the key to finding Annalisa's murderer. So they started doing everything they could to try and find out who she was. They spoke to the people who worked in the restaurant nearby the payphone, asking if they had seen the person who made the call that day, but they hadn't. And the police also dusted the phone for fingerprints. However, this didn't really result in anything because obviously it's a public phone. A lot of people use it, a lot of people touch that phone, and so there's bound to be many people's fingerprints and DNA on it. And unfortunately, there also weren't any CCTV cameras around that area where the payphone was. So the police were really struggling with this line of inquiry. They still had no idea who made that 911 call. But they carried on with the investigation. They continued looking for evidence, and forensic scientists and the major crime unit were brought in to assist with collecting potential evidence from the crime scene. Now, one of the things that the police noticed about the scene is that there was no forced entry to Annalisa's home. There were no smashed windows, and the lock on the front door hadn't been messed with, so the killer hadn't broken into the home. And also, just as a quick side note to that, nothing appeared to be stolen from the home. Annalisa had some pretty expensive stuff in there, such as a TV, she had a computer, she had some cash in her home, and none of it was taken, which immediately ruled out the robbery theory. So the police's theory at this point was that either the killer had knocked on the front door, and when Annalisa opened it, they just forced their way into her apartment and they started fighting with her straight away, or perhaps they didn't need to force their way into the home. Maybe the killer was someone that Annalisa knew and felt safe with, and therefore when she opened the door, she willingly let them into her home, and once inside, that's when they attacked her. And the level of violence that was used in this murder does suggest that maybe this crime was personal. Like we talked about earlier, Annalisa had sustained so many injuries. She had been stabbed with a knife several times. It was about 9 times in total. And she had been hit in the head with a dumbbell so hard that her skull was actually fractured. That indicates that there was a lot of anger in this killing. Whoever had done this to Annalisa was angry at her, and they were taking that anger out on her body. It also didn't seem as though there was a sexual motive to this crime, because there were no signs of sexual assault on Annalisa's body, and I believe she was found fully clothed. During a forensic search of the scene, the police were really hoping that scientists would be able to find some kind of trace of the killer's DNA, which you would think there would be, considering just how violent this murder was. As I mentioned, there had clearly been a fight and a struggle between Annalisa and her killer, so chances are they would find maybe the killer's hair, if they had hair. Maybe Annalisa pulled at it during the struggle, or maybe the killer themselves were injured during the attack and maybe they dripped their blood onto the floor or something. And the forensic team actually discovered that in the bathroom, which was not far from where Annalisa's body was lying, there was a small drop of blood on the bathroom sink next to one of the taps. So it was theorized that if the killer had been injured, maybe if they cut their hand or something during the murder, then afterwards they went into the bathroom to clean up and clean the wound in the sink. So maybe that little droplet of blood on the sink was the murderer's blood. So samples of the blood drop were taken and collected as evidence and sent off for testing. Meanwhile, as all of this was going on, other officers were conducting other lines of inquiry, such as speaking to Annalisa's friends and family, and they were soon informed by the people in her life that Annalisa had a boyfriend, Nelson Sessler. And as you would expect, the police wanted to speak to Nelson Sessler urgently, because in these kinds of cases, the boyfriend or partner of the victim is often the top suspect at the beginning of the investigation due to how high domestic homicide rates are. Although before the officers even set out to find Nelson Sessler, he actually turned up at Annalisa's home, which was obviously by now a few hours after the 911 call, a crime scene, and there were detectives and forensic teams in and out. And when he turned up, he asked the officers what was going on, what had happened, because this was his girlfriend's apartment. And it was following this that they had to inform Nelson that his girlfriend had been murdered, and they said that they needed to speak to him immediately. They needed to get a statement from him. So they sat Nelson down and they began talking to him about his relationship with Annalisa. Nelson told the police how long he and Annalisa had been together. He told them how they were very serious and committed to one another. He even said that he was planning to propose soon, I think. Although a couple of sources online state that they were already engaged, so I'm unsure what's accurate there. I'm not sure if they were already engaged or if Nelson was just thinking of proposing soon. But either way, this obviously indicates that Nelson was very much in love with Annalisa. However, his reaction when he was told that she was dead and had been brutally murdered almost suggested otherwise. Of course, everyone grieves in different ways, but the police were quite concerned with Nelson's immediate response to being told that Annalisa was dead. He didn't really have much of a reaction. He didn't shout or scream or cry at all. He was very calm, actually. I think all he really said was something along the lines of, "Oh God, I can't believe it. I can't believe this has happened," which could have possibly been down to shock. Maybe he was just in so much shock that he couldn't fully take it all in and he was just emotionless. Or the police were thinking that maybe the reason he didn't get upset was because he was the one who did this. Maybe he and Annalisa had a fight that day and this fight ended with him stabbing her to death. But Nelson just straight up denied it. He protested his innocence and said that he had absolutely nothing to do with his girlfriend's murder, and he gave an account of what he had been doing on the day of the crime. Nelson said that on the morning of Annalisa's murder, he was actually at her apartment. I believe he had slept there the previous night, and when he woke up, he said goodbye to her before he headed off to work. And that was the last time that he saw her alive. Annalisa was, of course, working from home that day, and Nelson said that they had arranged to see each other again after they had both finished work. So Nelson's alibi was that he had been at work during the time that his girlfriend was murdered, but obviously the police can't just take his word for it. They needed to check that and make sure that he was actually telling the truth. And when the police spoke to the employees at Purdue Pharma, the place where Nelson worked, his colleagues were able to confirm his story. They said that he was at work that day, and this was also backed up by like an employee check-in system that Purdue Pharma had, and also CCTV cameras. He was captured on CCTV at the office. So that was evidence that Nelson was not the killer. He couldn't have done it because he was at work at the time that the murder took place, and he can't be in two places at once. So now that Nelson was ruled out, the detectives just asked him if he could think of anyone that might have wanted to do this to Annalisa. And they also asked him if he knew the woman that made the 911 call, because at this point the police were naturally very, very suspicious of her, whoever she was. But Nelson didn't know who it was, and he couldn't think of anyone that would have wanted his girlfriend dead. He did tell the police about a couple of ex-girlfriends that he had, just in case they possibly could have been involved in this, but when the police investigated these exes, they were also ruled out of the inquiry. But as standard protocol, the police took DNA samples from these exes. They also took a DNA sample from Nelson Sessler and from Annalisa's friends, from her family, and also anyone that they identified as a possible person of interest, because the police were still really hoping that scientists would be able to find some trace of the killer's DNA at the scene, and then this DNA could be tested against the samples that they had taken from the people in Annalisa's life to see if there was any match, to see if she really was killed by someone that she knew. Now, if you recall from earlier, the investigators did find a tiny droplet of blood on the sink in the bathroom of Annalisa's home. And interestingly, when this blood was sent off for testing, scientists determined that this blood was a mixture of Annalisa's blood and another person's blood. So naturally, the police strongly believed that this was the murderers, which was a huge success for the inquiry because it meant that they had solid evidence. They had the killer's DNA that they could test against people. So they started doing just that. They began testing the killer's DNA against all of the samples that they had already taken. But so far, there was no match. It didn't match any of Annalisa's friends or family, any people of interest that they had so far, nor did it match her boyfriend, Nelson Sessler. So following this, the police submitted the killer's DNA into CODIS, which is the United States National DNA Database, obviously hoping that a match would pop up, but it didn't. The perpetrator's DNA was not on there. And unfortunately, following this setback, the case started to go a little bit quiet and slow down because I think they had really exhausted all lines of inquiry. Every single line of inquiry that they looked into just resulted in dead ends. The police still couldn't find the killer and they still had no idea who made that 911 call. And as the months went by, Annalisa's case remained unsolved. However, about 5 months after Annalisa's murder, another crime occurred in another state in the US, and it was a crime that kind of bore similarities to Annalisa's murder, and it would actually eventually provide a lead in her cold case. This crime happened in Westchester County in New York, which is roughly 26 miles away from Stamford in Connecticut, where Annalisa's murder took place. It was the 23rd of March 2003 when a couple of hospital staff that worked at Westchester Medical Center were outside of the hospital in the car park just getting some fresh air on their break when they heard and noticed something going on in the car park. It was the evening, so it was dark outside, so they couldn't really see too much, but it looked and sounded as though a man and a woman were having some kind of argument and fight by their car. So the hospital security guards went over, they split the two of them up, and the man was actually taken straight into hospital because he was bleeding profusely from 3 stab wounds that he had sustained in his chest area. He really needed urgent treatment, so he was taken into the hospital. Meanwhile, the police were called and the woman that he was fighting with was arrested. And this woman was actually the injured man's wife. It seemed as though his wife was the one that stabbed him 3 times. So she was apprehended and taken in for questioning whilst doctors tried to save her husband's life. This couple were Paul Christos and Sheila Davalu, who had been married for about 3 years since the year 2000. They were both very smart people. They actually met at New York Medical College in 1994, where they were both students. I believe at the time that this case took place, Paul was still carrying on with his studies, whereas Sheila had already begun her career in the pharmaceutical industry, and she was on a very good salary. So they lived in a nice place, they were doing well with money, they were financially stable. Paul and Sheila were a couple that seemed to have it all, which begs the question of what led to this? What events led to Paul being treated in hospital after sustaining 3 deep stab wounds to his chest, and Sheila being arrested for his attempted murder? Well, when Sheila was taken to be interviewed, she initially claimed that she had absolutely nothing to do with the attack on Paul. She actually said that she just came home that day and she found Paul on the floor. He was bleeding, he was complaining that he was in pain and hurting, and she could see the stab wounds in his chest. So she immediately put Paul in the car and she drove him to the hospital for treatment. She said that she was trying to help Paul, not hurt him. However, when the detectives spoke to Paul, he told a completely different story. Thankfully, despite how severe Paul's injuries were, I believe one of the stab wounds he sustained actually punctured his lung and just nicked his heart. But despite this, thankfully the doctors were able to stabilize him and he did start to recover. Although I don't believe the police actually told Sheila this at first. They kind of wanted her to believe that Paul didn't survive just to see what she would say, whether she would actually be honest about what had happened. And as soon as he was well enough, Paul said that he wanted to talk to the police about how he sustained the stab wounds. Paul told the police that he and Sheila's marriage had been a bit of a shambles for a long time now. They hadn't been getting on, they hadn't been communicating with each other very well. Paul said that although they were married and living together, it was honestly like they were living completely separate lives, and it had been that way for a while. So when Paul returned home that day on the afternoon of the 23rd of March 2003, he said that his wife Sheila made a suggestion that maybe the two of them should try something new in the bedroom that might kind of reignite and spice up their relationship. Basically, she wanted them to try a sex game, and Paul said yes. I think he was willing to do anything at this point, because at the end of the day he wanted his marriage to work and improve. He didn't want to split from Sheila. So he agreed, and they started playing this game, and in this game one of them would be blindfolded and the other person would get some kind of object from around the house and rub it on the blindfolded person's body, and then they would have to guess what the object was just from how it felt, because obviously they couldn't see, and they were going to take it in turns with this. So Sheila would be blindfolded, and then Paul, and then Sheila again, etc. So when it was Paul's turn to be blindfolded, he was sat down on a chair. Sheila actually put him in handcuffs, and then she was getting different items to rub on his body. However, at the end of his turn, Sheila said that she had one last object to use, but this object felt completely different from any other, because Paul actually felt this very, very sharp pain in his chest, like a heavy thrust in his chest. Paul later said, quote, "I heard her go down to the kitchen, and when she came up, she said, 'There is one last item, one last thing to guess.' I felt her sit on me, then I felt a thrust, like a heavy weight was on my chest, and then another thrust." Paul was suddenly in a lot of excruciating pain, and so he said to Sheila, "Please take off the blindfold." And when she did, he looked down at his chest and he just saw red. He was covered in blood from where his wife had just stabbed him twice. However, Sheila immediately denied stabbing him. She actually said that the object was a candle and that there must have been a little bit of metal, like sharp metal sticking out of the candle, which cut him. But I mean, a piece of metal sticking out of a candle does not cause deep stab wounds like the wounds that Paul sustained. But Paul didn't argue with Sheila. He just asked her to call him an ambulance because he was losing a lot of blood. He knew that this was very serious. So she does just that. Sheila picks up the phone and she calls 911. But the ambulance never turned up. They were waiting and waiting and waiting for it to arrive, but it just didn't. And so Paul literally begged Sheila to drive him to the hospital herself. So Sheila put Paul in the back seat of her car and she started driving to the medical centre, and eventually they arrived. However, when they got there, Sheila got out of the car, she opened the back door next to where Paul was sitting, and that was when Paul noticed that his wife was holding a knife in her hand. And with this knife, she stabbed Paul in the chest again. So this was the third time that she stabbed him in total. She stabbed him twice at their home and once in the hospital's car park. And that was the argument slash fight that the hospital staff heard. And thankfully, before Sheila could do anything else to Paul, the police were called and Paul was immediately taken into the hospital where doctors rushed to save his life. So that was Paul's account of what happened. So now that they had his statement, the detectives confronted Sheila and they said, "Look, this is what Paul has told us and it's completely different to your version of events." And so it was at that point that Sheila Davalloo started to change her story. She admitted that she lied originally. She lied about just coming home that day and already finding Paul injured and bleeding on the floor. That was rubbish. And she admitted that she used a knife on Paul during their sex game, but she said that she never meant to hurt hurt him or stab him. It was just an accident. And so the detective said to Sheila, how could this have possibly been an accident? How do you stab someone in the chest 3 times accidentally? It makes absolutely no sense. And Sheila's response to this was just, I don't know. She also denied stabbing Paul once in the car park at the hospital. She just said that that didn't happen, but the police soon found evidence to prove that she was lying about that too, because in the car park they found the knife that she had used to stab her husband. She had clearly dropped it on the ground afterwards. But another thing that they discovered in the car park was Sheila's mobile phone, which again she had obviously dropped while she was fighting with Paul. And what's interesting is that when the detectives had a look through her phone and they had a look through Sheila's call history, they quickly determined that she had lied to Paul and the police. If you remember, after Paul was stabbed the first 2 times in their home, he asked Sheila to call 911, call an ambulance, which she claimed she did, but her call history showed that she didn't. She never called for emergency services. So both of them were just waiting in the house for an ambulance to show up, even though Sheila knew that it would never arrive. And of course that completely discredits her second story. She said that she accidentally stabbed Paul with a knife, but if it was an accident, why did she lie about phoning for an ambulance? Why wasn't there any urgency about her? Why didn't she immediately take Paul to the hospital? Was it because she wanted him to bleed out and die before the doctors even had a chance to save him? Maybe so that he wouldn't tell them what really happened that night. The evidence was just piling up against Sheila at this point. Evidence that strongly indicated that this was attempted murder, not an accident. However, a huge twist in this case came when the detectives actually looked into the last call that Sheila Davalloo made on her phone. They found that the last call she made on the night that she stabbed her husband was to someone that was in Stamford in Connecticut, and there were a couple of voicemails from this same number as well. It actually turns out that Sheila was supposed to meet this person that night. On the night of the attack on Paul, she was due to meet them for dinner. They were going to go out for a meal. This person that Sheila was due to meet that night was called Nelson, and so naturally the police in Westchester in New York wanted to speak to this Nelson to see if he knew anything about the attack on Paul, if he knew what Sheila was planning to do that night, and also just to find out more about the nature of his relationship with Sheila. Were they just friends that were going to meet up for some food that night, or was there something more going on here? So after tracing where the call had been made from, a police officer was sent to Stamford in Connecticut to speak to this Nelson guy. However, when they knocked on his front door, there was no response. No one answered it. So they kept knocking, just hoping that someone would open the door eventually, but no one did. And soon enough, someone that lived nearby, a neighbour, actually came out of their house and they approached the officer and they said something along the lines of, "Oh, have you come about the murder of Nelson's girlfriend? Have you found who did it yet?" And the police officer from Westchester County had no idea what this neighbour was talking about. She hadn't been sent to talk to this Nelson guy about a murder. She had been sent to talk to him about Sheila Davalloo, who had been arrested for the attempted murder of her husband Paul. But eventually the officer realised what was going on, and I'm sure you guys have made the connection by now. This Nelson guy that Sheila had spoken to on the phone on the night that she stabbed her husband was Nelson Sessler. And as we know, Nelson Sessler was the boyfriend of Anna Lisa Raymundo, who had been murdered just 5 months earlier and whose case still remained unsolved. It seemed as though to the police at this point that Nelson Sessler and Sheila Davalloo had been having an affair behind their partners' backs, or at least Sheila was having an affair behind Paul's back. They didn't know what the situation was with Nelson yet, whether he had been cheating on Annalisa with Sheila when she was still alive, but both their partners, Annalisa and Paul, ended up getting stabbed. Annalisa was stabbed to death and Paul was stabbed so severely that he almost didn't make it. He was very close to death. So the police just thought that there was absolutely no way that this was just a coincidence. It was at this point when the police pieced all of this together that they knew these two cases must have been linked. And either Nelson and Sheila were somehow in this together. Maybe they hatched a plan to kill both of their spouses so that they could be together for real, or it was just Sheila Davalloo. Perhaps she killed Annalisa just like she tried to kill her husband. But I'm just going to put a pause on the actual case here for a second so that I can tell you a little bit more about Sheila Davalloo, about her upbringing and background, her relationship with Nelson Sessler, and just her life leading up to this point in March of 2003. So Sheila Davalloo was born on the 11th of May 1969, which means that she was 33 years old at the time that this case took place, at the time that she attacked her husband Paul. She was originally from Iran, that's where she was born. However, her family moved to Westchester County in New York in the US when she was still very young. It was at some point in the mid-70s. And I mentioned this earlier, but Sheila was a very intelligent person. She always did very well in school growing up, and when she finished high school, she attended SUNY Stony Brook University, where she earned a degree in biochemistry. And then following this, she attended New York Medical School, where she earned her master's degree. And by the time Sheila went to New York Medical School, she was actually already married. She got married at a pretty young age. I believe she was in her late teens when she got married. However, her first husband was not actually Paul Christos. It was a man named Farid Musafi. I do apologise if I'm not pronouncing that right. But she married Farid while she was a student at Stony Brook College, but their marriage didn't really last too long because it was when she went to medical school that she met Paul Christos. He was also a student there, and they started seeing each other. Sheila started having an affair with Paul until eventually she divorced her first husband and she later married Paul in the year 2000. After she graduated from medical school with a master's degree, Sheila got a job as a pharmaceutical researcher, and this job was at Purdue Pharma in Stamford in Connecticut, the same place where Nelson Sessler and Annalisa Raymundo also worked. So that was where she met Nelson Sessler, and it seems as though the two of them began seeing each other even though they both already had partners. And again, it seems as though they continued seeing each other even after Nelson's girlfriend Annalisa was murdered, because 5 months after her murder, on the evening of the 23rd of March 2003, they were due to go out for dinner together. However, things didn't quite go to plan. They didn't go out for dinner because Sheila viciously attacked her husband Paul that night with a knife, and she was obviously arrested. So we're back to where we were in the case, and now that the police had pieced all of this together and they realised that these two cases, the murder of Annalisa Raymundo and the attempted murder of Paul Christos, were probably linked, they obviously wanted to speak to Nelson Sessler again. So Nelson was brought in for questioning and he was asked about his relationship with Sheila Davalloo, and he was asked why he hadn't told the police about her before. When his girlfriend was murdered 5 months ago, why hadn't he mentioned Sheila? Because it appears as though she would have had a motive for wanting Annalisa dead. And Nelson basically told the police that he, Sheila and Annalisa all previously worked at Purdue Pharma together in Stamford, and he actually claimed that he started seeing Sheila before he and Annalisa got together. But he said that they weren't in a committed relationship at all. They were literally just seeing each other. It was pretty casual, and at the time, Nelson didn't want anything serious with anyone. He was just enjoying dating. And then eventually he started seeing Annalisa too. So he was kind of seeing them both at the same time until he started developing really strong feelings for Annalisa, and he realised that he wanted to be with her and only her. And so Nelson told the police that he ended his casual relationship with Sheila in 2002. He said that they weren't seeing each other at the time that Annalisa was killed in November of 2002, but he claimed that he did start dating Sheila again a couple of months after Annalisa's death, around early 2003 time, I think. Nelson also told the police that he had absolutely no idea that Sheila was married. She never told him that, and it is believed that that is true because apparently no one at Purdue Pharma knew she was married. She never told anyone that she worked with that she had a husband. In fact, Nelson was really shocked when he found out that Sheila was married, because he told the police that he had been to her house and slept over at her house in Westchester County on a number of occasions, and there was never any husband there. It was just the two of them. So the police asked Sheila's husband Paul about this, and it was when Paul was informed of this that things started adding up in his mind. You see, Sheila used to tell Paul that she had a disabled brother who he had never met, and this brother liked to come and visit her on the weekends. But due to his disability, Sheila said that her brother could be very possessive of her and that he would be very angry and upset if he found out that she was married. So she never told her brother that she was married. And so she used to ask Paul most weekends if he could leave their home whilst her brother was coming to stay, so that he didn't get overwhelmed and upset. And she would also ask that he take with him all of his stuff, or hide all of his stuff, so that it didn't look like a man was living there. And Paul believed this story. He believed his wife, and so pretty much every single weekend he would leave. He would go and stay somewhere else, like a hotel or something, so that Sheila could spend time with her brother. But of course it was just a massive lie. Sheila didn't have a disabled brother. In fact, I'm not even sure if she had a brother or any siblings. This was just a huge lie that she had invented so that the man she was having an affair with, Nelson Sessler, could come over on the weekends, and whilst he was there he would have no idea that she was married because her husband Paul had hidden all of his stuff. Sheila Davalloo was just absolutely obsessed with Nelson Sessler, and when he broke things off with her to be with Annalisa, she was just furious. She couldn't let this man go. She desperately wanted him to be with her, and it even got to the point where Sheila would apparently stalk Nelson and Annalisa. She would follow them. She would, I think, watch them through the windows of Annalisa's condo. She even had a pair of night vision goggles that she would use to obviously watch them at night when it was dark. So as the police are piecing all of this together, Sheila's motive for murder just becomes clearer and clearer. They were pretty much certain at this point that Sheila Davalloo was Annalisa Raymundo's killer. She was heartbroken at the fact that Nelson had left her for Annalisa, and so she decided to get rid of her. She was the thing standing in her way of being with this man. So she wanted to get rid of the competition. But before they could charge her with anything, they needed to find evidence, because at this point they just had their theory. They had no solid evidence linking her to Annalisa's murder, so they set out to find some. They started looking into what Sheila was actually doing on the day that Annalisa died, and it turns out that she was working. She was working at Purdue Pharma, and this could be proved by their check-in system and security cameras, etc. However, it was found that at the time that Annalisa was killed, Sheila Davalloo wasn't at work. She had actually taken a long lunch break and she left the office. And she was also out of the office at the time that the 911 call was made. As we've talked about throughout the video, the woman that made the 911 call reporting that a man had gone into Annalisa's house and attacked her was never traced. They never found that woman. But now the police strongly believed that the woman was Sheila Davalloo. She would have had enough time on her long lunch break to kill Annalisa, make the 911 call, clean herself up, and then go back to work as if nothing ever happened. Now, the 911 call was actually played for a number of different people. It was played for the detectives that had interviewed Sheila following the knife attack on her husband, and they said that they believed it was Sheila Davalloo's voice. And it was even played to some of Sheila's friends and family members, and many of them even said without a doubt that was Sheila's voice. So now the police could prove that she had been out of the office on a long lunch that day, which shows that she had the opportunity to kill Annalisa, but still that's not concrete proof that she was the one who did it. And so following this, the police started trying to find evidence that actually linked her to the crime scene, and that's where forensics and DNA come in. Now, we know that a tiny droplet of blood was found on the sink in Annalisa's bathroom, and when tested it was determined that this blood was a mixture of Annalisa's and an unknown person. This was the killer's blood. So when they identified Sheila as the main suspect in the case, they took her DNA sample to test against the killer's blood. And what do you know? It was a match. It was Sheila Davalloo's blood on Annalisa's bathroom sink. How else would her blood have gotten on that sink unless she was the one who murdered Annalisa? There is no other way of explaining that. So that was solid evidence that Sheila was the killer, and so she was charged with Annalisa's murder. Now remember, she had also been charged with the attempted murder of her husband, Paul Christos, by this point in time, and she actually went to trial for that in early 2004. And she went to trial because she pleaded not guilty. She was still sticking to her story that it was an accident. She accidentally stabbed him 3 times during their sex game. However, the prosecution had a lot of evidence against her. They had the knife that she used that was found in the parking lot. They had the evidence that she never called for an ambulance that night. And they had Paul. He survived the attack, so he was able to tell the police what actually happened that night. And he actually did the same during the trial. He was brought forward as a witness, and he told the court his memories from the attack, and he remembered everything. So at the end of the trial, Sheila was found guilty for the attempted murder of her husband, and her sentence was 25 years in prison. It's believed that she tried to kill him that night because she wanted him out of the way completely so that she could be with Nelson Sessler. She tried to kill Paul for the same reason the police believed she killed Annalisa. Now, it was quite a long time before Sheila was tried for the murder of Annalisa Raymundo. Her second trial didn't actually take place until January of 2012, so about 10 years or just under 10 years after Annalisa's murder. And I think the reason for this was just because the police and the prosecution didn't want to rush their investigation, their case against Sheila for Annalisa's murder, because really they had all the time in the world. They knew that Sheila was going to be in prison for 25 years anyway for what she did to her husband Paul. So they decided to just take their time with building their case against her, and they didn't prosecute until they were certain that their case was strong enough to convict her for this crime. But in January of 2012, Sheila Davalloo's trial began. She, of course, pleaded not guilty to the murder of Annalisa. She always denied it, and she was still denying it, so it was up to the jury to decide whether or not she was responsible. And during the trial, the prosecution pieced together what they believe happened on that fateful day in November of 2002. So of course they explained what they believed Sheila's motive was for the murder, that she was jealous and angry that Nelson Sessler wanted to be with Annalisa, and so she decided that she was going to get rid of Annalisa in order to get him back. So on the day of the crime, Sheila went into work at Purdue Pharma, and when she realised that Annalisa wasn't there, that she was working from home, she decided that that day was the perfect day, the perfect opportunity to carry out her attack. So on her lunch break, she went to Annalisa's apartment, she parked her car nearby, and she knocked on the front door. And when Annalisa opened it, she happily let Sheila in because Sheila was a work colleague. Annalisa probably thought that Sheila just wanted to chat about work or something, and so she let her in, and as soon as the door closed behind Sheila, the attack began. Now, I don't actually know if Sheila brought the knife with her to the scene or if it was one that she maybe just grabbed from Annalisa's kitchen. I'm guessing it was one that she brought with her because she obviously knew what she was going to do that day. She was going to go to Annalisa's apartment and kill her. And also, from what I can gather, the murder weapon was never actually found, but she began stabbing Annalisa with the knife repeatedly, although Annalisa was not willing to give up. She fought so hard for her life that day. Like we talked about earlier on, the scene was just a complete mess. There was blood everywhere, stuff all over the floor where there had been such a violent struggle between the two women. But unfortunately, as the attack continued, Annalisa was getting weaker and weaker from the blood loss and the blow to her head. Remember, she was hit in the head with a dumbbell that was found at the scene, and so eventually Sheila was able to overpower her, and Annalisa died as a result of her severe injuries. It's believed that during the struggle, Sheila must have been injured herself. Maybe the knife slipped at some point and it cut her hand, and so she went into the bathroom to wash her hands and kind of clean herself up, and that was when she left the tiny drop of blood on the bathroom sink. And just as a side note, it was discovered on Sheila's medical records that not long after the murder, she did go to either the doctors or the hospital because she needed treatment for a wound that she had on her hand. And at the time, she told the doctor that she had cut her hand while she was trying to open a can of dog food, but it's believed that that was a lie. She actually cut her hand while she was stabbing Annalisa Raymundo to death. But anyway, after she washed her hands in the bathroom, Sheila left the scene. She got back in her car. I imagine she probably changed her clothes in the car. She brought a spare change of clothes with her. And then she drove to a payphone about half a mile away from Annalisa's home. And there she rang 911 and made up the fake story about seeing a man go into her neighbour's home and hearing him attacking her. And it's not actually known why Sheila made this phone call to 911, because she could have just left it and let someone find Annalisa's body rather than send the police to the scene. Maybe she was worried that Nelson would find the body and she didn't want that. She did really love this man, so perhaps she didn't want him to go through that. I don't know. But the 911 call was brought up during the trial, obviously, and I believe the prosecution actually called in voice analysis experts because Sheila, of course, denied making the 911 call. She said that it wasn't her. But these experts said the opposite. They listened to the recording and said that they believed it was definitely Sheila Davalloo. They could tell that she was trying to disguise her voice on the call, but they still knew that it was Sheila Davalloo. Now, interestingly, when it came to the other side, the defence's side, while the defense was Sheila, she actually decided to represent herself. I don't know why some criminals and killers do this, but it honestly happens quite a lot. Ted Bundy did it. Rodney Alcala, the dating game serial killer, did it. I think, if memory serves, Trevor Hardy, the Beast of Manchester, did it. I've actually done a video about him before, so I will leave that linked in the description box if you want to watch it. I don't know why they do it because it never ends well. I don't know why they think they're smarter than actual lawyers, but Sheila Davalloo was another one that decided to represent herself. During the trial, she tried to discredit the evidence that the police had gathered. She said that it couldn't be proved 100% that she was the one who made the 911 call. She questioned the reliability of the DNA evidence. I believe she actually accused the police of planting her DNA, her blood, on the bathroom sink in Annalisa's home. She accused them of trying to frame her, which just does not work at all. It makes no sense because Sheila wasn't even a suspect in Annalisa's murder until 5 months later when she was arrested for the knife attack on her husband. And by that point, the police already had the killer's blood sample. They collected it from the scene shortly after Annalisa's body was found. So how could they have planted Sheila's blood there if they didn't even know who Sheila was at that point in time? Sheila's defense was just very, very weak, and in the end, the jury saw through her lies because on the 10th of February 2012, Sheila Davalloo was found guilty of the murder of Annalisa Raymundo, and for this, she was sentenced to 50 years in prison. So technically, she got 75 years in prison because she got 25 for the attempted murder of her husband Paul. So once she finishes that 25-year sentence, she will start serving her 50-year sentence for Annalisa's murder. So she will die behind bars. Sheila Davalloo still maintains to this day that she is innocent. She still claims that the attack on Paul Christos was an accident. She claims that she had no intention of killing him, and she still just straight up denies the murder of Annalisa. She refuses to admit that she was her killer, and I don't think she will ever admit it. I think she's probably convinced herself at this point that she is innocent. I just want to quickly mention here, because I feel like there will be a lot of speculation in the comments as to whether Nelson Sessler had anything to do with all of this. It's not believed by the police that he did. There is concrete proof that he was at work at the time of Annalisa's death and proof that he wasn't involved in the attack on Paul. And it's also not believed that he knew anything about Sheila's plans either. There was no evidence to suggest that he knew what she was going to do, kill Annalisa and then try to kill Paul. I mean, he didn't even know about Paul. He didn't know that Sheila was married. So yeah, I just wanted to add that here because I feel like there will be a lot of people wondering whether Nelson had any involvement, but it's not believed by the police that he did. But yeah, that is it for this video. That is the case of Annalisa Raymundo. A bit of a roller coaster of a case. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on this one in the comments. As always, please do let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. You can let me know in the comments, or alternatively, I do have a case request form linked in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!